I'm Angie Moon, and I'm going to be teaching ninth grade geography this year, and I thank you for allowing me into your home to help you. And I wanted to tell you just a little bit about myself, since we'll be kind of team teaching this year, and I wanted to give you just a little bit of my personal and professional background. And I was born in a Christian home in Kentucky and went to a fundamental church in West Virginia. We were just right on the border there. And I did attend public school in Kentucky and graduate from public school there before coming to Bob Jones University. And it was at the university that I got a final assurance of my salvation, so it means a lot to me because of that. But I also earned a Bachelor of Science degree in elementary education along with a minor in English. And after that, I went back home and lived in Kentucky, and then I taught 6th grade at the school there at the church where I grew up, Grace Christian School. And meanwhile, I began a master's degree in special education, still working on that one. And it was during summer school that I met my husband, Marty. And after we were married, we moved to Greenville so that he could continue working on a degree at the school, and I began teaching here at the Help Network, and I've been here for about 4 years now. And I do want to take a moment to share my goals for this subject with you. My main goal is to help your student understand concepts rather than merely memorize the facts. Though memorizing facts is a major part of geography, you should be able to see patterns as far as the different nations and the geography and how it affects the nations. And I also want to help your student develop a love for geography and learning about the different countries in the world. And I want to support and reinforce the biblical principles that you're teaching there at home. And my prayer is that your child will receive a burden for missions this year, which will lead him to pray for missionaries, possibly to write a missionary, hopefully to give to missions, and maybe even to go as a missionary to another country. Then we also have several curriculum goals for geography. For our basic comprehension, we want your student to be able to identify, to make associations, and to learn some geographical skills. Now, as I mentioned before, the primary goal does have to do a lot with memorization. We want your student to have a clear mental map of the main countries and regions of the world, so that when someone mentions a country, oh yeah, I know what continent that's on, I know the general location of that country, and the oceans and geographical features as well. So your students should be able to identify the 4 oceans, 7 continents, and their physical features, such as major seas, mountains, islands, lakes, and rivers. Also, he should be able to identify the 8 world culture regions and their primary characteristics, their physical geography, a little bit about their history, what type of religion most people practice, the language, the ethnic groups, as well as some information about the politics and economy of those countries. Also, we'll be looking at sub-regions within the 8 world regions. And your students should be able to identify every country in the world, every major city and capital in the world, and regions within each major country. For example, the United States, we have the South, the West, the Northeast, the Midwest, and so on. We also will be working on association as a skill, as a basic comprehension. It's a secondary goal for your student to associate certain features with each major country. For example, major land and water features. If he hears the name of a mountain range, that's very important. He should know what country it's in. Famous buildings, even famous people. Now, most memorization will be reserved for the history classes, but we'll be touching a little bit on famous people and even some world-changing events. And again, most of that memorization and the dates and things like that are reserved for history class, but they do factor into geography class. And then there are several skills that your students should learn as well. And he needs to be able to interpret basic types of maps, such as physical relief maps, climate maps, land use maps, and population maps. And there are other types, but those are just to give you an idea of some of the maps we'll be working with this year. Also, your students should define and use basic geographic terms. So many of those he'll already know: mountain, lake, stream, things like that. But we also want to be able to interpret common geographic tools, and we have a special feature, Geographer's Corner, that will help us with that. We'll be looking at topographic maps, climographs, flowcharts, cartograms, and other such tools that a geographer might use. And your student will learn how to use those and interpret those. Also, he should be able to describe the limits of maps in representing reality. We can't show a spherical Earth on a flat piece of paper without distortions. So there are limitations to geography and mapping. Your students should be able to compare and contrast different regions, find similarities and differences, show the relationship between physical geography and human activity like politics and economics, how geography affects culture, and so on. So those are some very important ideas. Also, he should be able to explain the motivations behind modern conflicts once he learns about some of the history and the ethnic groups. And he should be able to use the Bible to evaluate any country's social and political system, list special challenges to missions work. We'll be having special mission features throughout the year to help in that, and also evaluate news reports, and we'll have some features to help with that as well. Of course, besides just being able to identify, to associate, and pick up a few skills, we do want to incorporate higher level thinking skills. And the main idea here is for your student to be able to show how physical geography, culture and history, and politics and countries are all interrelated. So how does the geography affect the culture? How does that relate to the history and the politics of the nation? So that's one of the main conceptual ideas that your student will want to pick up on in the different areas of the world throughout geography. And of course, we have some spiritual goals as well. First of all, your student hopefully will be able to praise God for creating the world, and also he should learn to use the resources of the world, of our earth, to God's glory. He should be able to see how all people reflect God's image all around the world. Hopefully learn some things that will help him to witness to people of all cultures, and to be able to evaluate current systems of family and government based on biblical standards. And then, of course, he needs to recognize that man's fallen nature has caused the world's conflicts, and that God has set governments in place as his instruments of blessing and punishment. So several spiritual ideas that should come to light throughout the year, and those are things that you might want to focus on and highlight there at home as well. Now, how is this one geography program going to accomplish all of these goals? I'm just going to give you a little bit of the layout of our geography class. We're going to cover our topics with two approaches. And the topics that we're going to cover this year are a survey of the earth and its resources. Then we're going to look at the use of the earth's resources by man. And in the rest of our time, we're going to look at the geographical and cultural features of the people, of the different nations. And there are two approaches that we're going to use. One is a systematic approach. This is the first 5 chapters of the book. And we're looking at physical geography, climate, economic, society, population, culture, history, government, all of those types of things, those basic foundational ideas in those first 5 chapters. After that, we're going to move to a regional approach, chapters 6 through 29, and that includes the study of the region and the application of the systematic concepts. How does the geography affect the climate? How does the climate affect the lifestyle? How does the people's lifestyle affect their government, and so on. So we'll be using those. Those are foundational ideas at the beginning in our systematic study, we'll be using throughout the rest of the year in our regional study. Now, each geography lesson begins with an advanced organizer, and this is created with the student in mind. You are invited to watch because you are the primary educator. It will give a brief overview of the lesson. It might help you choose your level of involvement. It'll at least keep you informed and give you a frame of reference if you need to assist your student and answer questions. But there is going to be a special time just for you as parents before each unit, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Now, in the advanced organizer for your student, I'll make him aware of any materials that he needs. Here's an example. And I'll tell him what's on the agenda for the day, what our topic is, and if there are going to be any activities or special clips. And then I'll go over the main idea with him. as well as the goals for the day. And here are some examples of that. All right, now, just so you're familiar with them, I do want to take a moment to go over the materials needed for geography. Now, the essential materials include the student textbook. This is a great book, lots of color, lots of pictures, and a lot of maps. Most of the maps that your student will need are found in this textbook. Then also, it will be really helpful for you if you buy the teacher's edition. It does come in 2 spiral-bound volumes, and this will have the answers to all of the section reviews. It has color maps available in the back. It has all of the student textbook pages in it as well, answers to the chapter reviews, and you'll be responsible for grading those section and chapter reviews, so that can be very helpful. We also have an activity manual, and it is essential because I will be using it a great deal during the lessons. I've incorporated it, and it has just pages that can be ripped out and used. It has map activities and so on. These can just be pulled right out and used during the lessons. And then you might also want to get the student activities answer key, as you'll be grading those as well. Now, the activities are incorporated for note-taking. There are charts. It includes every map activity except for one from the map packet, so you will not need that map packet if you buy the activity key. Some other supplemental materials that you might want to get: there are tests and answer keys. This is a test answer key, just to give you all the answers there. That way you don't have to try to take the test yourself, so I would highly recommend that. There are map exercises available. This is not necessary if you buy the activities, because all of these except for one are included in the map activities. And then of course we have just the regular test that your student will take. So just keep in mind that their test is separate from the test answer key. All right, and another helpful feature about the answer key is that it does give you the page number where the answers are found. That way you can help your student look up the answers if there's something that he didn't understand. Now, I will typically go over the true false and the essays briefly during the lessons. And just a word about essays. Your student obviously will not be able to come up with everything exactly as it is on the answer key. And you just want to keep that in mind as you're grading. Look for complete sentences with proper grammar. That's part of writing an essay. Look for an opening statement, 2 to 3 well-worded sentences to support that statement. So maybe the answer key might have 5 things. You might look for at least 3 of those from your student, something like that. But don't expect your student to have everything that the answer key has necessarily. Okay? Now, from the advanced organizer, I'll get directly into the lesson. We'll begin with a chapter verse. We have a verse to work on memorizing for each chapter. I do not test over this, but you might wish to add that to each chapter test if you want to have your student write that out or even just say it to you orally. Then we typically review some information from the previous lesson, maybe true, false, or multiple choice, a chart, or some type of little run-through, just to refresh your students' memory of what was covered, some highlights from the previous section. Then I'll go over the highlights from the information from the textbook, and I'll do a presentation of the concepts. Now, obviously cannot cover everything. We're looking at every country in the world, and the geography class is a survey class. So you might see that, oh, I wish she had taught more about that. My student was really interested. Great. You might want to take a day off from the tapes, go to the library, get some information, let your student investigate and do some research on some of those nations that he's more interested in. I'll use some demonstrations, some footage of different areas, and some dramatic presentations to add a little bit of extra flavor to the lessons. We do show a lot of pictures during the lessons, and they're not always labeled. Some people would like to have a label on everything, but we do try to make sure that each picture is from the country or region being studied, but we don't always have access to the specific information that tells us exactly what every picture is. So the pictures are more just to give your student an idea, a concept of what the area is like, what the people look like, what the land looks like, and so on. Now, for evaluations and assignments, just a note on that, I do not give any quizzes because each section that your student reads has a section review along with it. And so I don't feel like it's necessary to do a quiz in addition to that. Of course, you're welcome to add a quiz in here and there if you'd like to. The reading I assign after the lesson. I hit the highlights, and then as your student reads, that reinforces to him what has been taught. And it will give your student the details. It'll fill in the details of what he needs to complete the section review. However, there are some students that might do better if they read the section information first. So they have an idea of what's coming, and then I hit the highlights and, oh, that sounds familiar. I remember reading about that. That must be important. And that is entirely up to you and your student and what works best for your student. So feel free to rearrange the reading schedule to suit your needs best. Then we do have, like I said, a section review for every section. Now there are a lot of those, and so you don't need to feel like you have to put a grade on every one. My suggestion would be have your student keep those in a notebook. He could even just skip a couple lines between each one and just do them continuously. And then you could count that as one grade at, once he gets up maybe to 100 points, maybe he earned 95 out of 100, or you could grade it every so often, every week or something like that, but you can make a decision there. But you're probably not going to want a separate grade for every section review. It's going to get to be too many grades. For the chapter reviews, they have a cumulative section, and I encourage you to have your student do those chapter reviews. But remember, he doesn't necessarily need to write out every single term and memorize every term, but you want to encourage him, if he doesn't remember a term, he looks at it and says, oh, I don't remember, those are the terms that he should try to write out and review more thoroughly. And the chapter reviews can be pretty challenging, so don't feel like your student isn't pulling his weight if he needs to ask for help on some of those. Then on the activities, the activity manual is very good. I do use many of those activities. There are generally 5 or 6 per chapter. Some have a little less. And you may want to have your student do all the chapter review activities. There is a review for each chapter and a cumulative review for each unit. You might want to have him do those ahead because I go over those during the lesson. So that's just up to you. He could try to fill in the answers quickly during the lesson. That way he can see how fast he is. Or you might want to have him work on those ahead of time and then just kind of check over his answers as an additional review during the lesson. So you can do a couple of those reviews and see what works best for you as a family. Now, some of the activities are marked as enrichment or as class discussions. For example, there's an activity on Islam. That might be something that you want to work on together or discuss together. You may not want to put a grade on that, but you want to just make sure your student understands the facets of Islam and how they don't match up biblically, things like that. So don't feel like you have to necessarily grade every activity either. You maybe want to randomly select 1 or 2 to grade each chapter and then just record those as grades. Of course, you want to look over everything and give feedback as often as possible, but don't feel like you have to mark everything in your grade book. Also, I don't necessarily assign every single activity. So some of the ones that I look over, you might want to go ahead and assign or use those as optional extra credit, or if your student's just particularly interested, he might want to work on those. And there's some really good book review pages at the end of the activity manual, and those are excellent as well, even though I don't assign them. Then, of course, you'll have some tests. There's 1 test per chapter. The tests are always at the end of the chapter. I don't announce them as an assignment or anything. I just assume once we finish it and I assign the chapter review, your student will know that the test is the next thing coming up. You might want to have the test on a separate day and then pick up the rest of the lesson on another day. You can break that up and spread that out however you want to. So again, you want to see what works for your student and what works for your schedule there. The tests also do have a cumulative section at the end of each unit. It's really pretty easy though, so I encourage you to have your student fill those out, even though it says optional. Fill out the essays, even though they say optional. You want to get your 9th grader practicing writing essays. And again, you might want to add a few maps, review maps or verses to some of those tests. Then, of course, we have projects. I just assigned 2 projects for geography. You're welcome to take away or add to that if you want to. The first semester project is Geography Island, and you'll find a chart similar to this in the printed information that will give you more details on it and allow you to assign dates, and a paper that will help you in grading that as well. And it is described more fully in the teacher's edition. And then the second semester project is a tour abroad, and I discuss that in more detail second semester, and you can look for information in the advanced organizer on the tour abroad as well for helpful charts and information. And you might want to give those projects the same weight as a test, or some people even choose to assign 2 test grades to the project. So that's again something that you can consider there. Then the idea of enrichment. There is some enrichment included in the activity manuals, the writings of Marco Polo, what God says about the environment, and so on. And you at home can do so much with enrichment. You can watch videos, listen to tapes of music or foreign languages. You can visit. Probably traveling is one of the best ways to get your student interested in geography. I know it's a little more expensive to travel overseas, but even traveling around the United States, getting books from the library about those nations, a lot of different enrichment that you can do there at home that I don't have time to do in the lessons. Now, because your student is in the 9th grade now and the advanced organizer is directed toward him, I've set aside another time to meet with you that's entitled Parent Preview. And this occurs at the beginning of each unit. And during this time, I'll highlight the concepts and the goals for the upcoming unit. And you want to be aware of this feature so you don't miss it, because it's kind of sandwiched in. It's in the last lesson of the last chapter of each unit. It's between the chapter test and the introduction to the next chapter. So you may want to have your student call you whenever it begins. You'll know, of course, because he'll be taking the test, and then right after that will be the preview. So have him call you in or listen for the Parent Preview theme music. Now, because our next program does begin the lessons, I want to go ahead and share the first parent preview with you right now. Our overview of this unit is that God made the world to be man's home. The earth provides for man's physical needs, it supplies industries, and it also gives us pleasure. Our unit is the world as God made it. And our unit goals are to read basic information on maps like latitude, longitude, and elevation, distinguish the various types of landforms and bodies of water, locate the 7 continents and 4 oceans, identify the basic differences between the tropics, the middle latitudes, and the polar regions, distinguish the 12 types of climate and the 8 types of vegetation. Now, Unit 1 includes chapters 1 through 3. Chapter 1 is an introduction to geography covering map reading basics. And our main idea for the first chapter is man has developed the field of geography to help him find his place in the earth. And that's the title of our chapter, Finding Our Place. Chapter 2 is about the Earth's surface, and this discusses God's natural forces that shape and change the Earth. And your student will continue adding to the basic knowledge of geography by learning new terms, especially those about landforms and bodies of water. So our main idea for the Earth's surface is God has designed each of the Earth's landforms and bodies of water for a special purpose. And then our third chapter is about climate. It explains God's natural forces that move heat and water. Now, the text won't go into all the details that your student might have learned in earth science, but it will serve as a review or maybe an introduction, and your student should be able to see how this information relates to geography. The main idea for climate is that God has designed the atmosphere to distribute heat and water around the earth. And as you can see, this whole unit focuses on earth science. So it could be a review for your student if he's already had earth science, or maybe he's taking earth science the same time as he takes geography, or the information might be brand new to your student if he hasn't had earth science yet. So you're going to want to plan accordingly, pace accordingly. If it's a review, you might want to move along through the first unit a little more quickly. If it's all brand new, you might want to spend a little more time reviewing, add a day or two in there as you go along. So now you've had your first parent preview, and again, I'll be meeting with you at the beginning of each unit just to give you a heads up of what's coming in the unit, and so you'll be prepared. You'll know, if you're checking books out of the library or whatever, you'll know what books that you want to have on hand, and I'll be doing that throughout the year. Also, you might want to have your student go ahead and sit in on the parent preview just so he knows what's coming up, and a couple of the times I'll be talking about projects that need to be done, and he'll want to hear that information as well. And I think it's good, even though it might seem a little dry, here are the goals, here are the main ideas, or it might seem like, well, shouldn't he figure that out on his own? Sometimes it's good to hear those things ahead of time. A lot of times pastors do that. Tonight I'm talking about, and they'll tell you some of their ideas, but then as they go along, they fill in the details, and it just reinforces the information that you're learning. So I think the previews for the units and even for the chapters and the daily lessons will be very helpful in just repeating that information and hearing that information spelled out a little differently each time. Now, in conclusion, I do want to thank you for allowing me to help you with geography this year, and I do want to remind you of a particular focus that I have in geography, and that is the focus of missions. Beginning about the 6th chapter or so, we're going to have a time to pray for Christians in other countries. And I'm going to set that aside a time at the beginning of each lesson. I won't actually be praying out loud, but we'll just have a time of pause there for your student to pray. You might even want to consider, as a family, praying for the people in the other countries. We're particularly praying for Christians in other nations. Another idea is to, if you know some people in a particular country, pray for them specifically. Jot them a note, either your 9th grader or as a family, and let them know that you've been praying for them. And that can be a true encouragement and really can help your student get involved in missions. And I think it will make geography more practical and more meaningful to your student if you do add that in and have that connection with people that are actually living in different lands. I do want to caution you, though, not to overwhelm a missionary in expecting them to necessarily respond to every letter, or to send you items or send your student items for projects or anything like that, but just to send a note of encouragement without asking for anything in return, to let them know that you were praying for them. And I do trust that our geography program, and I do say our because you see me, but there's a whole team of people, and I say sometimes we, there is a whole team of people that works on the geography curriculum to get the pictures and the footage and the special ideas together for you and for your family to enjoy. So we have prayed for you regularly in producing geography, and we do trust that the program will be beneficial to everyone involved and that it will meet your academic goals and also the spiritual goals that you have set for your family. And in closing, I just want to read a couple of verses. They're very familiar, but I think also very appropriate for geography and the goals that I have set for the year. Matthew 28, verses 19 and 20. Go ye therefore and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Ghost, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the world. Amen. So it's my prayer that perhaps you or your student, one of your family members, would be willing to pray, to give, to write, and even to go, whether across the street or around the world, to share the gospel with those that are lost.